The story of the Vanishing Village begins with an unsettling quiet, a stillness so deep it feels unnatural. The opening scene unfolds in Blythe Hollow, a remote village nestled between dense forests and mist-laden hills. The air is thick with an eerie tension, as if the land itself is holding its breath. A lone traveler, a merchant who occasionally passes through the village with supplies, arrives at dawn, expecting the usual morning bustle, the clatter of carts, the murmur of villagers beginning their day, the scent of freshly baked bread from the local baker. Instead, he is met with silence. The doors of the cottages hang slightly ajar, swaying gently in the wind. A half-eaten meal sits abandoned on a table, the food long since rotted. A child's toy lies forgotten in the dirt of the main path, as if dropped in haste. The traveler moves from house to house, knocking, calling out, but no one answers. The beds are unmade, candles burned down to stubs, as though the villagers had simply vanished in the middle of their routines. There are no signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints leading away. It's as if every single person in Blythe Hollow had been plucked from existence in an instant. The only clue is an unsettling detail, a strange symbol, almost like a twisted rune, carved into the door frame of the village church. The traveler touches it, and a cold dread seeps into his bones. He flees, and by the time he reaches the nearest town to report what he's seen, his voice shakes with a terror he can't explain. This opening scene sets the tone for the entire story, a mystery wrapped in silence, a horror that lingers in empty spaces. It's not just that the villagers are gone, it's that their absence feels wrong, as if the natural order has been disrupted. The scene leaves the audience with one haunting question. What could make an entire village disappear without a trace? The opening scene of The Vanishing Village is not merely a setup, it is a carefully constructed nightmare, designed to unsettle through absence rather than action. Every detail contributes to a growing sense of wrongness, a violation of the natural world so profound that it lingers like a stain on reality itself. Blythe Hollow is introduced not as a place, but as a void. The usual sounds of rural life, chickens clucking, children laughing, the rhythmic chop of firewood, are conspicuously absent. Instead, there is only the whisper of wind through empty doorways, the creak of a rusted weather vane spinning lazily. This silence is heavy, oppressive. It doesn't feel like peace. It feels like the aftermath of a scream abruptly cut off. The traveler's footsteps echo too loudly, as if the village is mocking his presence, reminding him that he does not belong here anymore. Nothing does. The horror of the scene lies in its incompleteness. This is not a village destroyed by disaster or war. There are no overturned carts, no shattered windows. Instead, everything is suspended as if time itself had skipped a beat. A pot of stew sits on a hearth, long since spoiled, the ladle still resting against its rim. A knitting project lies abandoned in a rocking chair, the yarn trailing off as if the hands holding it simply let go. In one home, a Bible lies open to Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, the ink slightly smudged, as if by a trembling finger. These details suggest not a planned departure, but an interruption. The villagers did not flee. They were taken mid-breath, mid-thought. The traveler is not a hero. He is an ordinary man, a witness who stumbles into something beyond his understanding. His terror is palpable because it is unspoken. He does not see ghosts or monsters. He sees nothing, and that is worse. When he finally runs, it is not from any visible threat, but from the implication of what he has witnessed. The village is not just empty, it is wrong. a still life painting where the subjects have been erased, but the background remains. His frantic report to the neighboring town is less about facts and more about the feeling he cannot shake. It wasn't just gone. It was like it was never supposed to exist in the first place. The story shifts from the eerie silence of Blythe Hollow to the cluttered, fluorescent-lit offices of the Daily Chronicle, where Daniel Carter, a journalist known for debunking urban legends, is handed a file that will unravel his skepticism thread by thread. His editor slaps down grainy photographs of the abandoned village alongside a witness statement from the shaken traveler. "Think there's a story here?" his editor asks, but the question feels heavier than it should. Daniel, ever the rationalist, scoffs. Probably just a hoax or some mass hysteria thing. But the way his fingers linger on the photo of that strange rune suggests a curiosity he can't quite smother. His investigation begins in the archives, where brittle newspaper clippings and local histories whisper of Blythe Hollow's past. The village was always odd, founded by a reclusive sect in the 1800s, the kind of place where outsiders were politely turned away. There are gaps in the records, whole decades where the village seems to disappear from history before resurfacing. A librarian hesitates before handing him a yellowed pamphlet. The Blythe Hollow Miracle, 1923. The article is vague, but the subtext is clear. Something happened there once before, something unexplainable. Then come the interviews. The bartender in the nearest town remembers serving Blythe Hollow's farmers. Quiet folk, always looked tired, like they hadn't slept right in years. An old woman at a roadside diner mentions her granddaughter once saw shadow people near the village borders. Her voice drops to a whisper. They didn't walk right, like their knees bent backwards. Daniel scribbles notes, his skepticism wavering. These aren't the ramblings of conspiracy theorists. These are ordinary people, their fear too visceral to dismiss. The final piece comes from a retired mail carrier who delivered to Blythe Hollow every Thursday. "Last time I was there," he says, lighting a cigarette with unsteady hands, "they'd all started wearing these little charms, twisted bits of metal like broken keys. Wouldn't talk about 'em. Then, the week after, poof, gone." He exhales smoke, his eyes distant. "You ask me? They were trying to lock something out, or maybe lock themselves in." That night, Daniel dreams of the village. In the dream, the rune on the church door pulses like a heartbeat, and the shadows between the houses don't just move, they breathe. He wakes with a start, his apartment too quiet, the street lights outside casting long, crooked shapes on his wall. For the first time, he wonders if he's chasing a story or if the story is luring him. By morning, he's packed his recorder, his camera, and a lingering sense of dread. The editor's last words echo as he leaves. "Just get the facts, Carter." But the facts are slipping like sand through his fingers. The closer he gets to Blythe Hollow, the more he feels it. This isn't just an investigation. The hum of fluorescent lights in the Daily Chronicle offices buzzes like a dying insect as Daniel Carter flips through the case file on Blythe Hollow. The photographs stare back at him. Empty chairs still pulled out at dinner tables, a child's bicycle abandoned mid-path, its front wheel still spinning slightly in the wind when the picture was taken. His editor's voice cuts through his thoughts. Think cult suicide? Mass hysteria? Daniel's response is automatic, professional. There's always a logical explanation. But his fingers betray him, tracing the edge of a photo where something indistinct lingers in a window's reflection. Not a face, not quite. His investigation unfolds like a slow poison. The archives smell of mildew and forgotten history. When he finds the 1923 clipping about the Blythe Hollow miracle, the paper crumbles at the edges as if resisting his scrutiny. The article is maddeningly vague. Entire congregation witnessed a divine manifestation, but the microfilm ends abruptly, the next day's issue missing. The librarian won't meet his eyes when he asks why. Interviews with locals play out like seances. A waitress at the diner recalls serving the villagers. They always sat with their backs to the walls, always watching the doors. Her hands shake as she refills Daniel's coffee. You know how animals act before a storm? Like that. At the bar, a grizzled farmer mutters about lights in the woods. Not firelight, greener, wrong. Before clamping his mouth shut. These aren't ghost stories, they're confessions, each one chipping at Daniel's rationality. The turning point comes in a back room at the county records office. A clerk, pale and sweating, slides him a land survey from 1890. The map shows Blythe Hollow's church built directly atop a convergence of ley lines, and something else. A notation in faded ink. Site of standing stones, removed. The tires of Daniel Carter's car crunch over dead leaves as he rolls to a stop at the outskirts of Blythe Hollow. The air here is different, thicker, heavier, as if the atmosphere itself resists intrusion. He kills the engine, and the silence that follows is deafening. No birds, no insects. Just the creak of the car cooling and the whisper of wind through skeletal trees. The village doesn't look abandoned. That's the first wrong thing. The houses stand intact, their windows unbroken, their porches swept clean by some unseen hand. A child's doll sits propped against a fence post, its glassy eyes tracking Daniel as he steps out of the car. His breath fogs in the air, though the morning is unseasonably warm. The ground beneath his feet feels spongy, like rotting fruit, and the scent of damp earth carries something metallic underneath. Old blood or rust, maybe both. He walks the main path, his footsteps echoing too loudly. The doors of the cottages yawn open, inviting and ominous. Inside one, a table is set for a meal that will never be eaten. The food has long since decayed, but the silverware is polished to a mirror shine. A fly lands on the rim of a teacup, then drops dead mid-crawl. Daniel's skin prickles. Then he sees the symbols. They're carved into door frames, scratched into tree bark, etched into the church's weathered stones. Not graffiti. The cuts are too precise, too deliberate. Some resemble runes. Others are shapes that make his eyes water if he stares too long. He traces one with his finger and jerks back as a jolt of cold shoots up his arm. For a moment the village shudders. The houses seem to lean closer, the shadows between them deepening. A diary lies abandoned on a porch swing, its pages fluttering in the non-existent breeze. The last entry is a child's handwriting. Mama says the watchers are hungry. Daddy told me not to look at them, but I did. They smile with too many teeth. The rest of the page is torn away. As the sun climbs higher, the light doesn't warm the village. It flattens it, bleaching the color from the grass and the wood until everything looks like a faded photograph. Daniel's camera malfunctions, his voice recorder picking up only static and, faintly, something that might be whispering. He tells himself it's the wind. By the time he reaches the church, his hands are shaking. The rune on the door frame pulses in his vision, throbbing like a wound. The door swings open at his touch, revealing a hollow darkness that smells of wet stone and burnt hair. From within, a sound, the scrape of something dragging itself across the floorboards. Daniel freezes. The rational part of his mind screams at him to leave. The journalist in him steps forward. The door slams shut behind him. The road to Blythe Hollow doesn't so much end as dissolve, the asphalt crumbling into hard-packed earth that seems to absorb sound rather than echo it. Daniel's car rolls to a stop where the village proper begins, though there's no sign to mark the boundary. Just a subtle shift in the air, like stepping through an unseen curtain separating the rational world from something far older. The first thing that strikes him is how lived in everything appears. Washing still hangs on a line behind the general store, the fabric stiff with years of weather but still holding its shape. A blacksmith's forge stands cold, yet the anvil gleams as if freshly polished. The entire village exists in a state of perpetual interruption. Meals left half-eaten, tools dropped mid-use, doors ajar with the expectation someone might return any moment. Daniel's boots kick up fine white dust that shouldn't be there, not in this humid climate. It clings to his pant legs like ash. The deeper he ventures, the more the village reveals its contradictions. A grandfather clock in the town square ticks loudly, its hands frozen at 3:17. Fresh wildflowers in window boxes, their petals unnaturally vibrant. The faint scent of baking bread that makes his mouth water before he realizes no oven could still be warm after all this time. The church looms at the village center, its spire slightly crooked like a beckoning finger. As Daniel approaches, he notices the ground becomes increasingly uneven, not from roots or erosion, but from what lies beneath. Ripples in the earth form concentric circles radiating outward from the church, as if something massive had burrowed down long ago and the land never quite settled properly afterward. Inside one abandoned home, Daniel finds a dining table set for 12. The plates bear the remnants of a feast now mummified by time. What chills him isn't the decay, but the arrangement. Every chair pushed back at the same angle, every napkin folded with military precision. Not the aftermath of panic, but of ceremony. At the village well, the bucket hangs suspended over black water that reflects nothing. When Daniel leans over, his breath catches. The water's surface remains undisturbed, even as his shadow falls across it. Then comes the whisper, so soft he thinks it's the wind at first. "You're early." He whirls around to face empty lanes. The windows of surrounding houses now all stand dark despite the afternoon sun. From the church, a single bell tolls, though the ropes hang still and cobwebbed. The village isn't abandoned. It's waiting. And Daniel realizes with dawning horror that he hasn't been investigating a disappearance. He's been answering a summons. The rain comes down in slanting sheets as Daniel stumbles into the dim sanctuary of St. Ignatius, a crumbling parish church 15 miles from Blythe Hollow. The air inside smells of beeswax and mildew, the votive candles casting trembling shadows across stone walls. At first, the church appears empty, until a rustling comes from the confessional booth, and a voice like dry parchment whispers, "You shouldn't have gone there." Father Alden emerges slowly, his cassock hanging loose on a frame grown gaunt with age. His milky left eye drifts slightly when he speaks, as if tracking something over Daniel's shoulder. The journalist expects dismissal, perhaps even anger, but the old priest simply sighs, as though he's been waiting for this conversation for decades. Over bitter tea in the rectory, the truth comes in fragments. Alden speaks of Blythe Hollow's founding families, not settlers, but exiles from an older, darker faith. The land was chosen not for its fertility, but for what slept beneath it. They called it a covenant, Alden murmurs, tracing the rim of his teacup. But it was always a transaction. The priest produces a ledger from 1843, its pages brittle with age. Listed in meticulous script are the village's annual tithes, not gold or grain, but names. Every 7th year, a family would vanish from records without explanation. Alden's finger trembles as he points to the last entry before the 1923 miracle. The hollow keeps its promises. Then comes the true confession. Alden's own grandfather had been the priest at Blythe Hollow during the 1923 event. The old man's final journal entry, scribbled in a manic hand, repeats a single phrase: "The stones are singing." As Daniel presses for answers, Alden grows agitated. The candlelight seems to shrink away from him, deepening the hollows of his face. He speaks of the villagers' final days, how they stopped attending Mass, how their eyes grew strangely reflective, how children would whisper of the watchers in the walls. They weren't preparing to leave, Alden says, clutching his rosary so tight the beads bite into his flesh. They were preparing to become... A sudden gust extinguishes the candles. In the darkness, something scrapes against the rectory window, a sound too deliberate to be branches. Alden seizes Daniel's wrist with surprising strength. "Go home," he hisses, "before you start seeing what they left behind." Outside, the rain has stopped. The path back to Daniel's car is dry, and on the passenger seat, though he swears he locked the doors, lies a single blackened stone, still warm to the touch. The rectory of St. Ignatius clings to the edge of the world like a last tooth in a rotting jaw. Daniel finds Father Alden not in prayer, but crouched over a spread of ancient documents, his gnarled fingers mapping patterns only he can see. The old priest doesn't startle at the intrusion. He simply turns his head with the terrible, deliberate slowness of a man who has been expecting the devil for dinner. "You smell like them now," Alden rasps. His voice is the sound of a shovel biting into grave dirt. What follows is not an explanation, but an exorcism of memory. The priest speaks in jagged fragments, his words peeling back layers of time like rotting wallpaper. How the first settlers didn't build Blythe Hollow's church. They excavated it, uncovering stone foundations older than Christianity. The way winter frost never touched the village. How snow melted before it could settle on church grounds. Children born there in the 1890s who stopped aging, their eyes growing cloudy as river stones. Alden's hands tremble as he unspools a ribbon of parchment. A census from 1911. Every surname matches those in Daniel's missing persons files. "No one ever left," the priest whispers. "They just went deeper in." The revelation comes not as a climax, but as a slow suffocation. Alden confesses that his grandfather performed the last Mass in Blythe Hollow on the eve of the 1923 disappearance. The old priest's journal describes parishioners standing motionless in their pews, their mouths moving in perfect unison to words not found in any liturgy. The final entry is a single sentence, the ink blotted as if by tears. The door was never meant to be opened from this side. As night falls, the rectory becomes a confessional without absolution. Shadows pool unnaturally in the corners, resisting the candlelight. Daniel notices Alden keeps glancing at a particular patch of darkness near the hearth, a space that seems thicker than it should be. When he asks about the runes, the priest's face collapses like rotten fruit. "Not markings," Alden corrects, his breath coming in wet hitches. "Mouths." The truth settles over Daniel like a burial shroud. The villagers weren't taken. They ate something they shouldn't have. And now, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, the stones beneath Blythe Hollow sing their hunger back into the world. Alden presses a rusted key into Daniel's palm, the same twisted shape the mail carrier described. "They're waiting for you," he says, not unkindly. Outside, the wind carries the faint, rhythmic sound of something knocking on church wood. Not from the door, from beneath the floorboards. Daniel knows he should leave. The rational part of his brain screams it as daylight bleeds from Blythe Hollow like life from a wound. But the journalist, the hunter of truths, wins out. He tells himself it's just one night, just until dawn, just to see. The village doesn't welcome him. It digests him. As the last light fades, the temperature drops not gradually, but all at once, like plunging into black water. His breath comes in visible gulps, though the air is still. The houses, so innocuous by day, now lean inward, their windows reflecting nothing but more darkness. His flashlight beam cuts through the night like a scalpel, revealing things that shouldn't be. Footprints in the dust that form a perfect circle around the church, all facing inward. The doll from earlier, now perched on a fence post, its head twisted backwards, his own voice recorder playing back whispers in reverse, though he never pressed record. Then come the movements at the edges of vision. Not shapes, but absences, patches of night that detach themselves and slither just beyond the light's reach. Daniel's skin prickles with the certainty of being studied, not watched, tasted. The church door stands ajar. Inside, the pews have been rearranged into a spiral pattern, their ends gnawed ragged. The altar cloth is stained with something that glistens wetly in his light. When he touches it, his fingers come away sticky with a substance that smells like copper and spoiled milk. Midnight brings the first true horror. A sound begins, not from one direction, but from everywhere. A wet, rhythmic pulsing like a giant heart buried beneath the village. The ground vibrates with it. The church bell tolls once, though no hand pulls the rope, and then the shadows laugh. It's not human, not animal. It's the sound of roots splitting stone, of ice cracking over deep water. Daniel's flashlight dies. In the perfect blackness, something brushes against his ankle. Not a hand, but something with too many joints. He flees blindly, crashing through doors, his pulse hammering in his throat. The village streets twist unnaturally, leading him in circles. Houses he could have sworn were behind him now block his path. The doll appears again and again, each time closer, its painted smile stretching wider than before. Dawn doesn't come so much as happen. The night simply gives up its hold, leaving Daniel gasping in the sudden gray light. His clothes are torn, his nails bloody from clawing at doors that wouldn't open. In his pocket, he finds a single blackened tooth that wasn't there before, and etched into his forearm, though he has no memory of it, a single twisting rune. The same one carved above the church door. Daniel Carter makes his fatal mistake as the sun dips below Blythe Hollow's crooked steeple. He assumes nightfall here follows the same rules as everywhere else. The change comes subtly at first. The golden hour light lingers too long, gilding the empty houses in amber, as if the village is holding its breath. Then, between one blink and the next, true darkness crashes down like a coffin lid. His flashlight beam cuts through the blackness with unnatural clarity, illuminating things that shouldn't exist. A dinner plate sliding across a table by itself, dragging rotten food into precise sigils. His own shadow standing frozen while he turns, its face slowly craning to watch him. The smell of his childhood home, fresh-baked bread, and his father's pipe tobacco, wafting from the empty blacksmith's shop. Then the whispers begin. Not from any direction, but from inside his skull, in a language that makes his teeth ache. The words slither between his thoughts, stitching themselves into his memories until he can't recall if the voice is foreign or his own. The church bell tolls once. Suddenly the village is alive with movement. Not the comforting bustle of human activity, but the wrongness of things moving when they shouldn't. Porch swings rocking in perfect unison despite the windless night, latches clicking open on their own as he passes. The doll from earlier now standing at every crossroads, its porcelain face cracking into a new expression each time he looks away. At midnight, the ground breathes. Daniel feels it first through his boots, a slow, rhythmic expansion beneath the earth, like the village is resting on some giant lung. The church doors swing wide, vomiting forth a darkness so complete it seems to drink the moonlight. That's when he sees them. Not shapes, but absences. Not figures, but the spaces between things given hunger and intent. They pour from doorways and windows, flowing together into a tide of anti-light that erases everything it touches. The last sane part of Daniel's mind shatters when he realizes they're not coming for him. They're coming from him, from his shadow, from his breath, from the spaces between his cells. As the first tendril brushes his wrist, time fractures. He's simultaneously running down the main road screaming, crouched in a cellar watching his own legs walk past the window, standing in the church belfry, ringing the bell with someone else's hands. Dawn comes like a guillotine. One moment, endless night. The next, gray, sickly light. Daniel finds himself seated at the head of the banquet table in the abandoned inn, a feast of long-rotted food arranged before him. His notebook lies open, filled with pages of that damned rune copied in perfect rows. And in the margin, in handwriting that is almost his, "One more night and we'll be ready." The cellar beneath Blythe Hollow's church isn't hidden so much as forgotten, a space that slides away from memory the moment you look elsewhere. Daniel finds it by accident, his boot crashing through a floorboard that shouldn't have been so brittle. The hole exhales a breath of air so old it tastes of wet limestone and something far worse, like meat kept too long in a damp place. The stairs groan under his weight, each step bending like the ribs of some great beast. His flashlight flickers, revealing walls that aren't wood or stone, but something in between. Petrified timber fused with jagged rock, veined through with filaments of black metal that hum when touched. The deeper he descends, the more the air thickens, until each breath feels like swallowing oil. The cellar is not a room. The walls pulse faintly, their surfaces etched with the same runes as above. But these are no carvings. They're scars, healed over something living. The floor slopes toward a central depression where the villagers' final act remains preserved. A ring of 12 chairs facing inward, their seats worn smooth from generations of use. A stone altar at the center, its surface stained a glossy black that still hasn't dried. Ledgers stacked neatly to one side, their pages filled with names. Each one crossed out in the same rust-colored ink. Daniel's hands shake as he opens the newest ledger. The last entry is dated the day before the disappearance. Every villager's name appears, written in that same precise hand. But what chills him to the marrow is the signature at the bottom. Father Alden's grandfather's name. The old priest's journal had lied. His grandfather didn't flee. He led them. A sound like cracking bone echoes from above. The floorboards splinter as something heavy drags itself across the church. Daniel's light catches the altar's underside, and the truth fractures completely. The stone isn't solid. It's hollow, its interior carved into a perfect spiral that reeks of spoiled meat and copper. At its center rests a single object, a human molar wrapped in that same blackened metal. When Daniel reaches for it, the walls shudder. and the runes begin to weep a thick, briny fluid. The final horror comes not from what he finds, but what finds him. His own name, freshly inscribed in the ledger, in handwriting he doesn't recognize. Yet, the church cellar doesn't smell of damp earth as cellars should, but of a butcher's block the morning after slaughter, that metallic tang of old blood soaked deep into wood grain. Daniel's flashlight beam quivers across walls that aren't quite stone nor timber, but something obscenely between. The fibrous texture of petrified muscle tissue, striated with veins of blackened metal that thrum beneath his fingertips like a sleeping beast's pulse. The spiral pattern from the altar repeats everywhere, in the warped floorboards, the rusted hooks dangling from the ceiling, even the grooves worn into the chair's arms by generations of clutching fingers. Not decoration, invocation. Ledgers stacked like sacramental texts reveal the awful arithmetic. Always a dozen, always exactly 7 decades apart, until the last page, dated the day before the disappearance, where every single villager's name appears in Father Alden's grandfather's spidery script. The covenant requires 12, but accepts so many more when offered. Daniel's breath comes in ragged gasps as he pieces together the blasphemous liturgy. The stones buried beneath the church aren't relics, they're teeth. The runes aren't carvings, they're taste buds. The villagers didn't vanish, they ascended the alimentary canal. A wet crunch echoes from above. The floorboards bulge downward as something immense shifts its weight in the church proper. Dust sifts through the cracks, forming spirals on the altar's surface. The black stain there isn't old blood at all. It's fresh, welling up from beneath the stone like sap from a tapped maple. When Daniel presses his palm to it, the cellar sighs. The walls secrete that same briny fluid, the liquid collecting in the spiral grooves of the floor, swirling counterclockwise toward the center. The ledger pages flutter without wind, stopping at a pristine sheet dated tomorrow's date, in his own handwriting, with 12 names. And at the bottom, the signature line waits empty, not for his name, but for his hand. The ledger slams shut on his fingers as the first chair scrapes backward from the circle above. The last dawn Daniel Carter ever sees breaks over Blythe Hollow, like a sickly yolk smeared across spoiled linen. He staggers from the cellar, his clothes stiff with dried brine, his fingernails packed with blackened earth from clawing at the altar stone. The village watches him with its empty windows, not judging, not hungry anymore, just waiting. His car won't start. The engine turns over with a sound like grinding teeth, then falls silent. When he checks under the hood, the battery cables end in frayed copper wires, not cut, but chewed. His phone screen flickers with static, the dates cycling endlessly between the day he arrived and tomorrow. The road out of town stretches longer than it should, the trees crowding closer with each step. His shadow walks ahead of him now, moving independently, its hands tracing patterns in the air, the same spiral from the cellar walls. When he turns to face the church one last time, the rune above the door pulses in time with his heartbeat. Then comes the worst realization of all. He isn't afraid anymore. The change happens in his marrow first, a warmth spreading through his bones like whiskey laced with ground glass. His reflection in a shop window shows his eyes gone mirror bright, his teeth slightly too large for his mouth. The whispers in his skull have settled into a chorus, their words now as familiar as his own thoughts. "You knew," the village murmurs through the creaking trees. "You always knew." His final notes are discovered months later by hikers, the pages fused together into a single pulpy mass. When peeled apart under laboratory conditions, they reveal only two legible phrases. The hunger is a circle. I signed where my father signed. Back in Blythe Hollow, the church door stands open. The dust in the pews shows fresh indentations, 12 distinct shapes, plus one extra seat near the pulpit. The altar stone gleams wetly, its spiral groove now tracing a new, darker pattern. And high in the belfry, the bell tolls itself at precisely 3:17 each morning, though no rope moves, and no one has lived there for generations, except in the cellar, where the newest ledger lies open. The last sane thought Daniel Carter will ever have comes to him at the village well, where the water has begun reflecting a version of himself he doesn't recognize. His fingers, once deft with pen and camera, now twitch with involuntary motions, etching that damned spiral into every surface they touch. The lines come easier each time, as if his bones remember the shape even when his mind rebels. Blythe Hollow no longer looks abandoned to him. The houses thrum with a low, vegetative pulse he can feel through his soles. The church windows glow with foxfire luminescence at precisely 3:17 each morning, casting shadows that move like mouths forming words. His tape recorder, left running in the empty inn, captures 12 distinct voices whispering in perfect unison, all speaking in his cadence, his timbre, but with words from languages that died before Babylon fell. The change accelerates when he finds the tools laid out for him in the blacksmith shop. A hammer with a head of that same blackened metal, 12 nails shaped like crooked fingers, a mold for casting the village's twisted charms. His hands work without conscious instruction, forging something that looks like a key made from frozen screams. The metal sings as it cools, a sound that raises blisters on his palms, even as it soothes the new hunger behind his eyes. The final surrender comes at the cellar altar. Daniel doesn't remember descending, but finds himself kneeling before the stone, his lips moving in a liturgy that tastes like his childhood lullabies rewritten in razor blades. The ledger lies open, its pages now filled with names, not just the villagers, but every investigator, every curious traveler, every lost soul who ever stumbled into Blythe Hollow across 2 centuries. His pen hovers over the signature line. From the darkness behind him comes a sound like 100 joints popping in sequence. The chairs have arranged themselves in their ritual circle. 11 sit empty. The 12th holds something that might have been Father Alden's grandfather. Its smile is all teeth and blackened metal as it extends a hand not to stop him, but to guide his signature. Daniel was never investigating the story. He was being prepared to become its next teller. The village's hunger manifests as a corrupting narrative force. Every tool, every discovery was carefully placed to facilitate his transformation. The true horror lies in realizing he's not the first journalist to sign the ledger, and he won't be the last. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.